My name is Margaret, and I'm 72 years old. For most of those years, I believed that love and sacrifice would always be returned with love. I was wrong. I raised my son Daniel on my own after his father walked out when Daniel was only 3. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3 during the holidays, just to keep us afloat. I cleaned offices at night and worked retail during the day. My hands were always red and raw from chemicals and hard work, but I never complained, not once, because every dollar I earned went toward giving Daniel a better life than I had. I saved for his college fund by skipping meals. I bought his textbooks instead of fixing my leaking roof. When he wanted to study business administration at a good university, I took out a second mortgage on my small house. The same house my mother left me. The same house where Daniel took his first steps, where I bandaged his scraped knees, where we celebrated every birthday with homemade cake because I couldn't afford bakery prices. He graduated with honors. I was so proud I cried through the entire ceremony. He got a job at a prestigious investment firm in the city. He moved into a sleek apartment I could never afford to visit without feeling out of place. And slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, I became something he needed to manage rather than someone he wanted to see. The first sign came when he stopped bringing colleagues home. He used to be so proud to introduce me, to tell stories about how I'd worked so hard for him. Then one day, he told me it would be better if we met at restaurants instead. "It's just easier, Mom," he said, "more central." But I knew. I knew when he started correcting my grammar in front of others. I knew when he stopped mentioning me in conversations about his childhood. I knew when his eyes would flicker with embarrassment if I wore my comfortable clothes instead of the expensive outfit he'd bought me, the one that hung in my closet with the tag still on because it felt like wearing someone else's skin. Then he met Victoria. Victoria came from money, real money, the kind that doesn't need to be earned, only inherited and invested. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels. Her mother sat on charity boards and hosted galas. And from the moment Daniel introduced her to me, I could see it in her eyes. I was a problem to be solved. That first dinner, she asked what I did for a living. When I explained I was retired now, that I'd worked in cleaning services and retail, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "How quaint," she said. Daniel didn't defend me. He just changed the subject. The visits became less frequent, the phone calls shorter, and when they did come by, I could feel them counting the minutes until they could leave. They would glance at my modest furniture, my dated kitchen, my garden that I tended with my own hands because I couldn't afford landscapers. I saw Victoria whisper something to Daniel once, and he nodded, his face tight. I was becoming the mother he wanted to hide, the evidence of a past he'd rather forget, the reminder that he came from nothing and she came from everything. But I still loved him. God help me, I still loved my son. The engagement announcement came via text message. Not a phone call, not a visit. A text. "We're engaged. Wedding next spring. Talk soon." I stared at that message for an hour, waiting for the follow-up, waiting for him to call and hear the joy in my voice, to let me cry happy tears like mothers do. The call never came. When I finally reached him 2 days later, Victoria answered his phone. "Oh, Margaret," she said, her voice saccharine sweet. "Daniel's in a meeting. I'll have him call you back." He called back 3 weeks later. The wedding planning happened around me, not with me. I wasn't asked about the date, the venue, or the guest list. When I carefully inquired about what I could do to help, Victoria informed me that they had a very specific vision and had hired professionals to handle everything. What about my family? I asked Daniel. Your cousins, your Aunt Linda, who helped raise you when I was working nights. Mom, he sighed, like I was a child asking foolish questions. Victoria's family is covering the costs. It's a small, elegant affair. We can't just invite everyone. I'm not asking for everyone. I'm asking for family. Your family. We'll see, he said, which I understood meant no. Then came the day they visited to discuss something important. I made Daniel's favorite cookies, the ones I used to pack in his lunchbox. Victoria looked at them like they might contaminate her. They sat across from me in my living room, and Daniel wouldn't meet my eyes. Mom, we need to talk about your living situation. My living situation. As if my home was a problem to be solved. What about it? I asked carefully. Victoria leaned forward, her expression arranged into something she probably thought looked like compassion. Margaret, you're not getting any younger. This house is far too big for one person, and frankly, the maintenance must be overwhelming. I managed just fine. But do you? Daniel asked. His voice had that edge to it, the one he used at work when closing deals. The roof needs repairs. The plumbing is old. You're 72, Mom. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one finds you for days? I have neighbors. I have friends. We think it would be better if you considered selling. There are wonderful assisted living communities, much more appropriate for someone your age, and the equity from this house could go toward your care. The equity from my house. My mother's house. The house I'd poured my life into. This is my home, I said quietly. Mom, be realistic. Daniel's voice rose slightly. You can't maintain this place. And honestly, Victoria and I have been thinking, once we're married, we'll need a place with more space. A house like this, in this neighborhood, with some updates, could be perfect for starting our family. The words hung in the air like smoke. They wanted my house. They wanted me to go into a home so they could have mine. I see, I said. It makes sense, doesn't it? Victoria's smile was brilliant and empty. You'd be taken care of. We'd preserve the family home. Everyone wins. Everyone wins. Except me. I need to think about it, I managed to say. Daniel's jaw tightened. There's nothing to think about, Mom. It's the logical choice, unless you're being deliberately difficult. That night, I lay awake and tried to remember when my son had become this stranger, this cold, calculating man who saw his mother as an obstacle. But the worst was still to come. 2 months before the wedding, they came again. This time, there were no cookies. Daniel paced my living room while Victoria sat perfectly poised, her designer handbag in her lap. We need to discuss something uncomfortable, Daniel said. Victoria's parents are concerned about the wedding photos, about how things will look. How things will look, I repeated. Victoria jumped in, her voice careful. What Daniel means is that his family and my family come from very different backgrounds. My parents have certain expectations for how things should appear. They're inviting very important people, business associates, society connections. And, my voice was steady, but my hands were shaking. And they think it would be better if you kept a low profile. Maybe you could attend the ceremony but skip the reception. Or, honestly, it might be easier for everyone if you weren't there at all. The words struck me like a physical blow. You don't want me at your wedding. It's not that we don't want you there, Mom. It's just complicated. You don't understand this world. You'd be uncomfortable anyway. All of Victoria's family, they're different. They're sophisticated. They're rich, I finished. They're rich, and I'm not. I'm an embarrassment? You're being dramatic. Am I? I stood up, and something in my movement made them both flinch. You want my house. You want me gone. You want to erase where you came from. Tell me, Daniel, what exactly do you want me for? His face went red, and for a moment I saw something ugly cross his features. You want to know the truth, Mom? Fine. Yes, you'd be an embarrassment. Yes, Victoria's parents don't want to explain who you are and why you look like you do and talk like you do. And yes, honestly, this whole thing would be easier if you would just step back. Let us live our lives without you hovering around, reminding everyone that I came from nothing. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria put her hand on Daniel's arm, but she didn't contradict him. She didn't tell him he'd gone too far. She just sat there, her face blank. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. Mom. Leave? Please. They left, and I stood in the middle of my living room, the home I'd worked myself to the bone to keep, and I realized something that changed everything. My son didn't love me. Maybe he never had. Maybe I'd been a means to an end, a provider of resources and support, and now that he didn't need me anymore, I was just in the way. But there was something else I realized, something that made my spine straighten and my tears stop falling. I didn't have to accept this. I didn't have to beg for crumbs of affection from someone who saw me as a burden. I didn't have to fade away quietly so they could move on without guilt. I could take my power back. And that's exactly what I decided to do. The morning after that terrible conversation, I woke up with absolute clarity. I was done being the problem in my son's perfect life. If he wanted me gone, I would show him exactly what that meant. But first, I needed to protect myself. I called my neighbor, Dorothy, who'd been my friend for 20 years. I told her everything. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she said, "What do you need?" "I need you to trust me, and I need you to help me with something unusual." "Anything," she said. Next, I made an appointment with Gerald Morrison, an attorney I'd met years ago through community connections. His office was small but respectable, and when I explained what I wanted to do, he leaned back in his chair and studied me carefully. "Are you sure about this?" he asked. "Completely. It's going to be complicated, and it might be painful." "It's already painful," I said. "This way, at least I'll know the truth about who my son really is." Over the next 3 weeks, I put my affairs in order with meticulous care. I revised my will completely. The house would not go to Daniel. Instead, it would be sold, and the proceeds would go to a scholarship fund for single mothers trying to get their education. The fund would be named after my mother. Daniel would receive exactly $1, and the will would state clearly why. I transferred my savings to a new account Daniel didn't know about. I organized all my important documents. I wrote letters to the few people who truly cared about me to be delivered after my death. Letters explaining what I was doing and why. Then came the hardest part, staging my disappearance. Gerald helped me create a scenario that would be believable but not traumatic for others. I would be found unresponsive by Dorothy during one of her daily check-ins. She would call 911, but instead of paramedics, a private service Gerald had arranged would arrive in an ambulance. They would transport me to a private facility, not a hospital. The death certificate would be filed by a doctor Gerald knew, someone who owed him favors and asked no questions. It wasn't entirely legal, but it wasn't entirely illegal either. It existed in a gray area that Gerald assured me would hold up long enough for what I needed. After this is over, there will be paperwork to file. We'll need to reverse the death certificate, which will raise questions. But by then, you'll have what you need. I'll have the truth, I said. The day we chose was a Tuesday in late January. Daniel hadn't called in 6 weeks. The wedding was 3 months away. Dorothy came over that morning, and we went through the plan one more time. She was nervous, but determined. "You're one of the bravest women I know," she said, hugging me. "Or one of the craziest," I replied. "Maybe both." I packed a small bag with essentials. Gerald had arranged for me to stay at a private residence outside the city, a place owned by a retired colleague. I would be comfortable there, hidden, but comfortable. At 2 in the afternoon, Dorothy made the call. Her voice was genuinely shaken as she told the dispatcher that she'd found her neighbor unresponsive. The private ambulance arrived within minutes as planned. I lay on my couch with my eyes closed as they loaded me onto the stretcher. Through my barely open eyelids, I saw Dorothy standing in the doorway, tears running down her face. Real tears, even though she knew the truth. "I'm sorry, Margaret," she whispered as they carried me past. "I'm so sorry." The ambulance drove away from my house, away from my life, and toward whatever truth waited for me on the other side of this deception. In that back of that ambulance, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Free. Daniel received the news from the police that evening. Dorothy had given them his number as the next of kin. She told me later, when I called from my hiding place, that he'd answered on the 4th ring and sounded annoyed. "What?" he snapped. She said that after the officer told him, there was a long silence. Then, "I see. Yes, I understand. I'll handle the arrangements." No tears, no shock. Just cold efficiency. Dorothy attended the memorial service at my house when people came to pay respects. She wore a wire, a tiny recording device that Gerald had provided. "It's for your protection," he'd explained, "and for the will." Through Dorothy's eyes and ears, I witnessed how people reacted to my death. Some of my real friends were devastated. Linda, my sister-in-law who'd helped me raise Daniel, sobbed openly. My neighbor Robert, who I'd made soup for when his wife died, looked genuinely shaken. These people loved me. Their grief was real. But then there was Daniel and Victoria. They arrived late, dressed in black that looked more fashionable than mournful. Victoria's outfit probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. Dorothy told me that Daniel moved through the small gathering with practiced grace, accepting condolences with a somber expression. But she heard him, when he thought no one was listening, talking to Victoria in the kitchen. "At least she won't have to worry about the house anymore," he said. "Daniel, that's awful," Victoria replied, but her voice held no real reproach. I'm just being practical. She was getting older. This was probably for the best. For the best. My death was for the best. Dorothy's recording caught more. Victoria's mother, Patricia, arrived with her husband. She embraced Victoria and gave Daniel a stiff hug. Then, standing near the window with a glass of wine, she said to her husband, "Well, this does simplify things, doesn't it? No awkward photos to explain. No worrying about what she'll say or wear." "Patricia," her husband murmured, glancing around. "Oh, please, Harold. Everyone's thinking it. The wedding will be perfect now." Gerald came to visit me at the safe house 2 days after the memorial service. He looked grim. "You need to hear this," he said, and he played me the recordings. I sat in the quiet living room of a stranger's house and listened to my son, the boy I'd raised and sacrificed for, discuss my death as if it were a business matter resolved. I heard his future mother-in-law celebrate the convenience of my passing. When the recording ended, Gerald asked, "Do you want to stop? You don't have to go through with the rest." I wiped my eyes, but they were dry. All my tears had burnt away into something harder. "No," I said. "I'm seeing this through." The funeral was small. Daniel chose the cheapest option at the funeral home, despite the fact that I had life insurance that would have covered something more substantial. He kept the insurance money, naturally. It was his now. Dorothy attended and sat in the back. Only about 20 people came. Daniel gave a brief eulogy that Gerald later obtained a copy of from the funeral home's recording system. I listened to my son talk about what a simple woman I'd been, how I'd done my best with limited means, how I'd always wanted him to succeed. He made me sound like a minor character in his success story, footnote material. He didn't cry. Not once. After the service, Dorothy heard Victoria's father talking to Daniel in the parking lot. "I'm sorry for your loss, son. I know this is difficult timing with the wedding coming up. Actually, sir, I think it might be a blessing in disguise. My mother was complicated. She had expectations that were difficult to manage. Now I can focus entirely on building my future with Victoria, our future." "That's a mature way to look at it," Mr. Richmond said, approvingly. "You're going to fit into this family just fine." They buried my empty casket on a gray February afternoon. I wasn't there, but Dorothy was. She said it was one of the hardest things she'd ever done, standing at that grave, knowing I was alive, watching Daniel shovel dirt on a box that contained nothing but weighted sandbags. That night, Dorothy came to see me at the safe house. She was exhausted and emotionally drained. "I don't know how you're holding up," she said. "I'm not sure I am, but I need to see this through to the end. I need to see what happens at that wedding." "You're still planning to go?" "Oh, yes," I said. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Because now I knew the truth. My son didn't love me. He never had. I'd been an obligation, a burden, an inconvenience. But he was about to learn something important. Dead mothers can't be embarrassed, but sons who celebrate their deaths can be. The wedding was planned for a Saturday in mid-April at the Richmond estate. It was everything Daniel had dreamed of: elegant, expensive, and completely disconnected from anything that reminded him of where he came from. I spent those months in hiding, healing in ways I hadn't expected. Without the constant weight of trying to earn my son's love, I felt lighter. I read books I'd been meaning to read for years. I took walks in gardens far from my neighborhood. I talked with Dorothy on the phone, and she kept me updated on everything. Daniel moved into my house 2 weeks after the funeral. He and Victoria claimed they were taking care of the property until the estate was settled. They threw out most of my belongings. Dorothy managed to save some photo albums and personal items, sneaking them out before the dumpster came. "They're redecorating," Dorothy told me, her voice tight with anger. "Victoria has contractors coming in. They're gutting your kitchen." "It's not my kitchen anymore," I said quietly. "Let them have it. They'll lose it soon enough." Gerald was working on the legal details of my reappearance. The plan was simple. I would reveal myself at the wedding, in front of witnesses. The recordings of their conversations, combined with the testimony of those who'd heard their callousness, would support my decision to cut Daniel from my will entirely. "The will contest will be ugly," Gerald warned me. "He'll argue that you weren't of sound mind when you faked your death." "Let him argue. I have recordings, I have witnesses, and I have the truth." The wedding day arrived warm and beautiful. Perfect weather for a perfect lie. Gerald had arranged everything. Dorothy would attend as a guest, claiming to be a friend of the family. She would text me when the moment was right. I would be waiting in a car nearby, dressed not in funeral black, but in a beautiful blue dress that my real friends had helped me choose. "You're not going to this as a ghost," Linda had said firmly. "You're going as yourself, alive and strong." I waited in the car as the ceremony began. Dorothy texted me updates. "Ceremony starting. Victoria looks like a princess. Daniel looks smug. Vows exchanged. No one mentioned you. Reception beginning. They're about to do toasts." That was my cue. I got out of the car and walked toward the elegant tent where 200 guests were celebrating my son's new life. Security was minimal. They weren't expecting trouble at a society wedding. I moved through the gardens like I belonged there, just another guest in a nice dress. I could hear music and laughter. I could hear the clink of champagne glasses. And then I heard my son's voice, amplified by a microphone. I stopped at the edge of the tent, hidden behind a column of flowers, and I listened. Daniel stood at the center of the reception tent, microphone in hand, Victoria beside him in her white gown. He looked happy, genuinely happy. "I want to thank everyone for being here today," he began, his voice smooth and confident. "Victoria and I are so grateful to be surrounded by the people we love, the people who matter." The people who matter. I noticed the emphasis. You know, marriage is about building a new life together. It's about letting go of the past and embracing the future. He paused for effect. And I have to be honest with you all. This past year has been challenging. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the crowd. "I lost my mother earlier this year." He said it without emotion, a simple statement of fact. And while loss is never easy, I've come to realize that sometimes things happen for a reason. My blood went cold. Victoria squeezed his hand, encouraging him to continue. "My mother was a difficult woman." Some people laughed uncomfortably. "She had expectations, she had demands, she wanted to be involved in every aspect of my life, even when it wasn't appropriate, even when it was holding me back." I gripped the flower column, my fingernails digging into the foam. Victoria's family has shown me what true family looks like. Supportive, but not suffocating. Loving, but not demanding. They've welcomed me with open arms and treated me like the son they never had. Mr. Richmond raised his glass proudly. So here's what I want to say, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. Daniel raised his champagne glass high. I'm grateful. I'm grateful for this new beginning. I'm grateful that I can start this marriage without the weight of the past dragging me down. I'm grateful that I can build something beautiful without constantly worrying about disappointing someone who could never be satisfied. People were nodding now, caught up in his speech. Some of you might think this sounds harsh, but anyone who's dealt with a difficult parent understands. And honestly, he paused, and his next words came out clear and sharp. I think God knew what he was doing. He knew what I needed. He knew that I couldn't truly move forward with my mother hovering over me, judging every choice, reminding me every day of where I came from instead of celebrating where I was going. A few people looked uncomfortable now, but most were still nodding along. So here's my toast. Daniel raised his champagne glass high, to new beginnings, to freedom from the past, to the family I've chosen and the family that's chosen me, and to my mother, wherever she is. He looked up at the sky with a practiced, sorrowful expression. I hope you finally found peace. And I'm grateful, truly grateful, that I can finally find mine. The tent erupted in applause. Glasses clinked. Victoria kissed him with tears in her eyes, and I stepped into the light. The first person to see me was a woman at the nearest table. Her champagne glass slipped from her fingers and shattered on the ground. She made a small, choked sound and pointed. Others followed her gaze. One by one, conversations died. The applause faded into shocked silence. I walked forward, my heels clicking on the wooden floor they'd installed over the grass. Every eye in that tent turned to me. 200 people, frozen in place, watching a dead woman walk toward the happy couple. Daniel saw me. His face went from confusion to recognition to absolute horror in the space of 3 seconds. The color drained from his cheeks. The microphone fell from his hand with a screech of feedback. "Hello, Daniel," I said. My voice carried across the silent tent. That was quite a toast. Victoria made a sound like she'd been punched. She grabbed Daniel's arm. Her perfect composure shattered. "Mom?" Daniel's voice was a whisper. "But you're dead. We buried you." "You buried an empty casket," I said calmly. I kept walking until I was 10 feet away from him, close enough that he could see I was real, solid, alive. I've been very much alive, Daniel. Alive and listening. The crowd began to murmur. Phones came out. People were recording this. Mr. Richmond stood up, his face red. "What is the meaning of this? Who are you?" "I'm Margaret Anderson, Daniel's mother, the one he just thanked God for removing from his life." "This is insane," Victoria said shrilly. "Daniel, she's insane. She faked her death. Who does that?" "Someone who wanted to see the truth," I replied, never taking my eyes off my son. Someone who wanted to know what her son really thought of her, what he'd really say when he thought he couldn't hear him. "You had no right." Daniel started, but I cut him off. I had every right. I'm your mother, Daniel. I raised you. I sacrificed everything for you, and you were too ashamed of me to let me attend your wedding." The crowd gasped. This was better than any drama they'd expected. "That's not true," Daniel said weakly. "Oh, but it is." I turned to address the crowd. "He told me I was an embarrassment. He told me that Victoria's family didn't want to explain who I was or why I looked and talked the way I did. He asked me to stay away from the wedding so I wouldn't remind people that he came from nothing." Victoria's mother stood up, her face pale. "That's slander." "It's documented," I said calmly. Gerald stepped forward from the crowd where he'd been waiting, holding a folder. Every conversation, every cruel word, recorded by witnesses and by recordings that were legally obtained, including the conversations that happened during my memorial service. I looked back at Daniel. "You want to know what you said when you thought I couldn't hear? You said my death was for the best. You said it simplified things. You said you were grateful for your new beginning." Tears were running down Daniel's face now, but I felt nothing. No sympathy, no regret. "And your wife's mother?" I turned to Patricia Richmond. "You said the wedding would be perfect now because there'd be no awkward photos to explain. You celebrated my death like it was a business problem solved." Patricia sat down abruptly, her face ashen. Whispers spread through the tent like wildfire. "I don't have to stand here and listen to this," Daniel said, finding his voice. "You're disturbed. You faked your death. That's fraud. That's a mother testing her son's love," I said quietly. "And you failed, Daniel. You failed spectacularly." I nodded to Gerald, who stepped forward and handed Daniel an envelope. "What's this?" Daniel asked. "That's the new copy of my will," I said. "I had it revised before my staged death. You're no longer my beneficiary. The house you've been redecorating? It's being sold. The proceeds will go to a scholarship fund for single mothers. Everything I own will go to charity or to the people who actually love me." "You can't do that," Victoria shouted. "That house is Daniel's birthright." "Birthright?" I laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "He called me a burden. He wished I was gone. He got his wish, didn't he? And now he can live with the consequences." Daniel lunged forward, but Mr. Richmond grabbed his arm. The older man looked at his new son-in-law with something like disgust. "Is what she's saying true?" Mr. Richmond demanded. "Did you say those things?" Daniel's silence was answer enough. "Get out," Mr. Richmond said, his voice like ice. "Both of you. You've humiliated this family. You've turned my daughter's wedding into a circus." "But Dad," Victoria started. "Out," he roared. Security appeared then, hired men in suits who'd been watching this unfold with everyone else. They moved toward Daniel and Victoria, who were both crying now. But I wasn't done. "One more thing," I said as they were being escorted toward the exit. Daniel turned back to look at me. "I forgive you." His face crumpled with hope. "But I'll never forget," I continued. "And I'll never let you forget either. Every time you see that scholarship fund, every time you hear about single mothers getting the help they need to better themselves and their children, you'll remember the mother you threw away. The mother who loved you more than you deserved." They let him out. Victoria was sobbing into her hands. Daniel looked back at me once more, his face a mask of devastation and rage. And then they were gone. The tent erupted into chaos. People talking, arguing, phones everywhere, recording and posting. This would be all over social media in minutes. The Richmond name, the scandal, Daniel's career, his reputation, all of it burning down around him. I felt Dorothy's hand on my arm. "Let's get you out of here," she said gently. Not yet. I turned to the crowd, to the shocked faces of people who'd spent the evening drinking expensive champagne and judging me without ever knowing me. I hope you all remember this, I said, my voice carrying over the noise. Remember that the people you dismiss, the people you look down on, the people you think don't matter, they're watching, they're listening, and sometimes they're planning. I turned and walked out of that tent with my head high. Behind me, I heard Linda's voice rising above the chaos. That's the bravest woman I've ever known. Gerald was waiting outside with his car. Dorothy climbed in beside me, and Linda appeared from somewhere in the crowd to join us. As we drove away from the Richmond estate, away from the wreckage of Daniel's perfect day, I watched the elegant mansion recede in the rearview mirror. "How do you feel?" Dorothy asked carefully. I thought about it. I thought about the years I had spent trying to earn my son's love, the sacrifices I had made, the humiliation I had endured, the death I had faked just to see the truth. Free, I said finally. I feel free. Linda squeezed my hand. What will you do now? Now? I smiled, and it was real. Now I live. Actually live. Not for anyone else, not to earn love or approval or gratitude, just for me. Gerald drove us back to my real home, the apartment I'd been renting under a different name. It was small but comfortable. It was mine. Over the next weeks, I learned what happened to Daniel and Victoria. The videos from the wedding went viral. Daniel lost his job at the investment firm. They didn't want the scandal attached to their name. Victoria's parents filed for an annulment, claiming fraud and emotional distress. They blamed Daniel for humiliating their family. The marriage lasted 6 weeks. Daniel tried to contact me. He called, he emailed, he even showed up at my old house before remembering I didn't live there anymore. I blocked every attempt. There was nothing left to say. The house sold for a good price. The scholarship fund was established in my mother's name. The first recipient was a 35-year-old woman who worked 3 jobs to support her 2 children and dreamed of becoming a nurse. When I met her to present the award, she hugged me and cried, "You have no idea what this means," she said. Oh, I have every idea. I'm 73 now as I record this story. I live in a small apartment with a garden view. I have real friends, people who chose to be in my life and whom I chose in return. I volunteer at the community center. I take art classes. I'm learning to paint. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if I was too cruel, if I should have handled things differently, if I should forgive Daniel and let him back into my life. Then I remember his toast. I remember him thanking God that I was gone. And I remember that I didn't destroy my son. He destroyed himself. I just made sure the world was watching when he did it. My name is Margaret, and I'm 73 years old. For most of my life, I believed that love and sacrifice would always be returned with love. I was wrong. But I learned something better. I learned that the greatest love I could give was the love I gave to myself. The choice to walk away from people who didn't value me. The courage to stand up in a room full of strangers and speak my truth. I learned that I was worth more than my son's approval. And that lesson, painful as it was to learn, was worth everything. I raised a son who outgrew his mother, but in the end, I outgrew my need for him. And that, my dears, is how I took my life back.